you were to toss me into a dark movie theater, strap me to a chair, and focus my eyes open onto a screen, hand me a controller, and force me to play AI the Somnium Files for like 5 hours, and then ask me what my opinion of the game was, I would probably come away saying with about 95% certainty that this was a Spike Chunsoft game and all that entails, before, of course, I go off to therapy. And that's a pretty accurate summary of the game. It's very, very Spike Chunsoft. For all that's worth, all the hallmarks are here. It's dark, it's wacky. The characters are all unique and strange. It's got an atmosphere that likes to balance itself between being a little bit too melodramatic, also being sort of this dark, morbid experience. The characters are all very expressive, but none of them have yet in the story had any real defining character traits. Most of them are pretty one note. At this point in my gameplay, I've only played about somewhere between 4 and 5 hours. I'm not too far in, and it's very, very Spike Chunsoft. If you're thinking like Danganronpa, which is my favorite Spike Chunsoft series, it's I wouldn't say it's so similar as to be a copy of it, but in terms of its atmosphere, in terms of its feeling, it's very, very similar. So what is AI the Somnium Files? Well, it's mostly a visual novel. Most of the game is spent in parts like this, just listening to characters talk, explain what's happening, give their own perspective on what's occurring. In addition to that, you can sort of look around most areas and get some additional flavor text from all of the environments. Some of it will provide additional dialogue from the characters in the room. Some of it will just be kind of random text, and all of it really does add to the charm of the game. Unfortunately, it's limited to its visual novel style. There's not a whole lot of exploring on the part of the player. Most shots, in fact, I think all shots that are not within the sole gameplay section that I'll talk about in a few moments, most shots sort of take place in a very fixated point in each room. You can kind of look around, but there's no movement, there's no switching between points. It's literally just you in a room looking at objects and people. If you're really not into visual novels, this game may turn you off. But unlike most visual novels, this one is, from what I can tell, almost entirely fully voice acted in both English and Japanese. I'm currently playing the Japanese dub, although I do plan to go back to the English dub once I've finished or gotten through a significant portion of the Japanese one. It's just my preference, but I've heard the English dub is pretty good and people seem to enjoy it, so if that's something you're looking for, it's here. The game also is pretty friendly to those who have any sort of reading disabilities or issues. Like I said, it's almost fully voice acted, and the only parts that really need to be read that aren't sort of extemporaneous notes and files on really minuscule stuff. The only parts besides that are tutorials, and most of that can be figured out by just trial and error anyway. So there's no real issue with getting into this game if you have any hang-ups or reading problems. If you're someone who just doesn't like to read in most games, like most visual novels, it becomes kind of monotonous or boring. The characters are all fully voice acted. Most of them do a pretty good job in the Japanese version, at least. There are a few. There's not a whole lot of characters to begin with, but there are a few standout cases that I enjoy their voices more than the rest of the cast. But each character is well voiced. They bring their own sort of unique flavor to each scene that they're in, and the scene is really set by the characters that are in it, as opposed to sort of the happenstance of what's currently happening in the story. So what is the story? Well, the game starts off basically on a murder investigation of this lady known as Soko. She is killed strapped to a carousel and with her left eye gouged out, and it's sort of the protagonist's role to find out what's happened and to bring the culprit to justice, hopefully. At least I think that is what's happening. I'm not too far in. And he does that through a series of very unique abilities. There's, of course, regular sort of questioning witnesses and looking at the environment, but he also has an AI built into his left eye, which is pretty interesting and will sort of sidestep the ethics of having an AI strapped into one's brain, essentially. But he uses this AI to access additional ways to explore investigation areas. He can use it for X-ray mode, for heat, for thermal sensing. He can zoom in to places where he's not supposed to be able to see. And this all sort of builds to the protagonist being sort of an expert detective, even though I'm not exactly sure how much of that field he's in. The protagonist is part of a specific sect of the police department, where his speciality is the game's other main mechanic, which is what's known as syncing, where he can essentially enter the dreams of those he needs to interrogate for whatever reason. Whether it be they're stubborn and they don't want to talk, or they're unable to talk for some reason, he's able to enter their dreams and sort of get a handle on what the situation is and what actually happened that these characters saw. So once inside these somniums, as they're called, where the protagonist is syncing with their subject, basically this is the only part of the game that is explorable in a traditional sense, where you have a character that can move around. Granted, you're not actually controlling the main character, you're controlling your AI partner, Ava, as she sort of traverses the dreamscape that is currently happening. She's able to interact with all of the with a lot of objects in this environment, but it is a dream, so many of those objects act in strange and mysterious ways, and you sort of have to use, I guess, what they call dream logic to sort of figure out how to get past what each character has that are known as mental locks, which are holding the meat of the deep secrets in each person's psyche. As Aba, you need to make specific choices to further advance through these locks and find out what happened to this character and hopefully get further in solving the mystery. Each action in the Somnium takes a certain amount of time. You only have a 6-minute time limit in every Somnium past the tutorial. This isn't really too much of a problem, because if you do mess up a lot and waste a lot of time doing tasks that don't actually yield any results, you can always push yourself back a few locks and get that time back. And if you really screw the pooch, you can just restart the entire Somnium process and start from scratch. One of the sort of neat features is that each Somnium comes with, each choice that you make in the Somnium, can come with a bonus of what are known as, I think, called timies. And what they do is they will cut part of the time off that it would require to do subsequent actions. Of course, using this will consume said timey. There are also negative ones. I don't remember the name of them, but they act the opposite. They take away time, additional time to what would normally cost for each action. And those ones, unfortunately, are required to be used when you have them in your inventory. So it sort of becomes a puzzle to get to the end before you run out of time. It's not so much of an issue, as I said before, because, again, you can just rewind should you screw up really badly. But it is an interesting concept, and the more interesting part of it is that the Somniums house where the game diverges in terms of its story path. Each Somnium, as far as I'm aware, I've only gone through a few of them, but each Somnium seems to provide at least two distinct story paths. I'm not sure how different the story diverges when certain choices are made in the Somnium, but it seems to be pretty drastic because there's this flow chart where all the paths are laid out, and they all seem to be pretty distinct. And I'm assuming there's a lot more Somnium, so that could lead to a bunch of additional, replayability. All very interesting and will really extend the amount of time that one can spend on the game if it is indeed as meaty as I think it may be. It may not be very meaty though, and that's a valid concern that I have going forward. So yeah, the bulk of the gameplay lies in these Somniums. And apart from that, really the only gameplay is the visual novel portion of it. There are some quick time events that happen throughout the story. There's also a light detective portion of it where you need to match the correct piece of evidence with the correct statement that's being said. But those are also pretty simple. We're really looking at only two modes of gameplay here, and one of them being entirely just enjoying the story while sitting back and not doing much. So if you're really looking for sort of an action-packed game, this will not fill your need at all. But if you are looking for an interesting story with a lot of unique characters, again, this is Spike Chunsoft, and that's sort of their forte, in my opinion. So if that's what you're looking for, this game definitely will fulfill those needs. I've enjoyed all of the characters. I can't say that they're my favorite Spike Chunsoft characters. I don't even really like the protagonist of Date yet. Although, again, I'm very early in the story, so I assume that his character will flesh out more, as well as the other characters, as the story progresses. But I can't confirm or deny that until I get further in myself. I will say that as far as some of the dialogue goes, not all of it is, top notch. Some of it sort of falls flat. A lot of the jokes are not super funny. I think some of that may be just lost in translation kind of stuff. Again, I'm listening to the Japanese voice acting, so maybe I'm just missing some of it. Some of it actually is pretty funny in English, but not all of it seems to hit its mark. There's also a fair number of jokes that are sort of, I don't want to say mean-spirited, but they're very suggestive, they're innuendos, and most of those are more uncomfortable than they are funny, and they did take me out of the experience for the most part. I think it's sort of par for the course that a visual novel of this style would have those kind of moments. My favorite series, Danganronpa, also had those kinds of moments, but they seem to be more sporadic than is in this game. It seems like every scene in this game has at least one joke that relates to Dante's sexuality in some form or another, and it's really not necessary for the atmosphere that most scenes are going for. Most scenes have a very serious atmosphere. Again, there are exceptions to this. It's not a doom and gloom game overall. There's a fair amount of lighthearted, joking moments, but overall it is pretty. I mean, it's a murder mystery essentially, where more murders keep happening and it gets more and more desperate, as far as I'm aware. So those sort of innuendos, they don't really add anything, and if anything, they just kind of take me out of the experience. Again, if that's something that you either find funny or are able to get past, again, it shouldn't cause too much of an issue either way. So that's just something to think about as you go through, if you're thinking about picking up this game and haven't already, that those moments are there. So overall, the game is probably one of Spike Chunsoft's best in my opinion. It fills a lot of the void that was left by the end of Danganronpa, in terms of its tone and atmosphere. I like its character designs, its story, while not being the most gripping yet. I am still playing it. It's still pretty fun. So yeah, I'm enjoying myself. I will probably finish the game. I may even go back and play more of the paths if they seem to be unique, and expound upon what happened in the path that I went down myself. I'm hoping that they're not just sort of minor divergences that don't have any meaning. Again, they look pretty, I don't want to say super drastic, but they look like they can lead down some interesting paths from what I've seen. So I'm hoping that that is the case, and my additional time with the game once I've completed it will only provide me more joy. This has been your Fabled Feline, and I'm signing out. Hope you enjoyed this first impressions. So let me know what you thought of the game in the comments if you played it. But until then, farewell.